This man, being reincarnated, awakened to his power, production magic. A barren village fell into his hands, and under his management it was quickly set to become the most formidable stronghold. As the youngest son of a marquis, he had shown extraordinary intelligence since he was 2. On top of that, he was incredibly cute, which made the maids love to gather around him and serve him. From a young age, he knew that in any world, survival depended on hard work and learning. When the butler learned of George's eagerness to study, he took it upon himself to personally test him. He quickly realized George had an exceptional talent for learning and decided to take charge of his education. The painful studying process reminded George of his past life and the fear of being dominated by high-level skills. In his spare time, George would also practice swordsmanship with his personal maid, Till. However, since he wasn't fully grown yet, he would always lose to her, and their sessions often turned into playful moments. But George, with the soul of an adult and having studied martial arts in his previous life, was soon too skilled for the other children at the Marquis estate. By the time he was 5, there was no one left in the estate who could spar with him. Seeing George's exceptional talent in swordsmanship, the vice captain of the Marquis Knights offered to train him personally. He would rigorously drill George every day, and even during breaks, he would continue intense training, requiring George to substitute every move with a horse riding stance. However, as George's fame as a genius spread, his older brothers started to look at him with suspicion, seeing him as a rival for the inheritance. To protect himself, George decided to play the role of a lazy, reckless spendthrift until he came of age, to put his brothers' concerns to rest and ensure his survival. Thus, George went to the largest money-wasting hub in town, the Merry Trading Guild. However, as soon as he entered, he saw an old man leading his own son, ready to sell him as a slave for money. A receptionist quickly approached, and George asked how much the boy would be worth. After evaluating, the receptionist offered a fair price of 3 silver coins. The old man immediately became furious, calling his son a useless liability. Seeing this, George quickly offered 5 silver coins, saving the boy's life and further cementing his image as a spoiled rich kid. The receptionist eagerly helped George and the boy form a contract. With a flash of light, the boy received a slave brand on his hand, meaning he would remain George's slave unless George chose to release him. As a modern person, George was still uncomfortable with the idea of owning a slave. However, the boy was incredibly grateful to George, believing that George had saved his life. Unlike most slaves who would hide their brand, the boy saw it as a symbol of his bond with George. He would listen to no one's orders except George's, even boldly standing up to the vice captain, someone George himself feared. Surprisingly, the vice captain admired the boy's courage and decided to train him properly. At the age of 8, George was set to officially test his magical affinity. To his surprise, he didn't inherit the Marquis family's ancestral fire magic. In fact, he didn't have any of the 4 main elemental affinities. Instead, he had awakened a so-called useless magic, production magic. In this world, the aristocracy held the 4 elemental affinities in high regard, and as a result, George became a source of embarrassment for the Marquis family, someone who must be erased. However, his eldest brother quickly stood by him, advising the Marquis to send George to a village near the enemy's border as a lord. If George managed to develop the village, it would be a credit to the Marquis house. If George were to die unexpectedly, it would also provide a good excuse to take control. Thus, the Marquis assigned a village to George, not willing to spend another second there, leaving with the second and third brothers who were clearly disgusted with George. The eldest brother felt guilty for not being able to protect George, but he had no other choice. People were moved and angry at George's fate, but George actually felt excited. He thought it would be better to manage his own land rather than stay at the Marquis estate, where scheming could lead to death. Although George was effectively exiled, the vice captain and butler, who had already taken him as their successor, both resigned from their positions at the Marquis estate and chose to stay with George, helping him build a new empire.